Hello again, I'm Ronnie Bringle, and for this video lesson I'm painting a Santa face. It's time to start lesson number 2, so I'm going to get right to it. In the first session we got about 3 layers of flesh tone onto Santa's face, and we wanted to make sure that that was completely dry. So if you're painting in one long painting session, just make sure that you dry this with the hair dryer or give it a little bit of extra time before you go on to the next steps. So for these steps, for the next step we want to do a wash. So those first steps were kind of they create kind of a rough look. What we did was we built up color in some of the most intense areas, and so sometimes that's going to give it a little bit of a rough look to it, and so in order to smooth things out, I generally am going to now give it a wash. Sometimes when people get a little too much color on their face with those first few steps, you don't have to do this wash because you've already got enough paint on. But what I prefer is to build up so that you've got more color in some of these areas and a lot less paint in the darker areas, and then smooth things out with a wash. So I'm using my flesh tone and water, and I would call this a medium wash. It's not real thin, but it's not a real heavy wash either. I want to make sure, like I said before, that I don't pull my flesh color onto my background, so I want to be careful on that left-hand side. But then I'm just going to go ahead and quickly lay a wash of flesh tone over the entire face. I've used my oval blender, number 10. I like to use the oval blender for the washes because it has irregularly cut hairs, so you can lay down a nice wash without having the paint pool up in any one place. So get the wash on there. Now that has to dry very well, so I strongly recommend that you use the hair dryer on it. Make sure it's very, very dry to the touch. So I'm going to take this to the dryer, and when it's dry we'll go to the next step. So what we've accomplished with the wash is that we've smoothed things out, and we've also made sure that there's a little bit of flesh color in the deepest parts, in the deepest grooves of the surface. So he's just a little bit smoother now, and he's all nice and dry. Now mine is still just a little bit warm. You want to make sure that your surface is not too warm, because when you put your next layer of paint on, then that warmth will make the paint dry a little bit faster than what you want, because the next step now is to do another wash. Now remember that the dark areas in your flesh, if you're Caucasian, the dark areas are not blue, they're brownish colored. So what we want to do now is we want to turn all those blue areas into more of a grayish brown color. So I'm going to use burnt sienna. If you're using Josonia, you're going to use brown earth. So we're going to use burnt sienna again with a medium wash, and again I want to make sure that I don't overstep that edge of the face. I want this wash to be fairly heavy. I want to create some nice dark values that I can pull the flesh out of. So don't be afraid to make this kind of dark. Obviously you don't want to paint it all solid so that you lose all of your detail, but you can make it pretty dark. Also, if it's a little bit streaked or blotchy, you can see how streaky mine is, I never worry about that. It is absolutely not going to make the least bit of difference. And the more times you stroke over that to try to eliminate the streaks, number one, you don't really get rid of the streaks, and number two, you're going to lift color from underneath. So you don't want to lift that flesh color that you applied before. So once you've got your wash of burnt sienna on, then you're going to take it to the dryer again so that you can work over it. So we'll take this to the dryer and come right back to it as soon as it's dry. Okay, so my burnt sienna wash is dry now, and like I said, you can see that it's very streaky, and that doesn't bother me at all. I don't want to play around with it too much while it's wet. But it is nice and dry now. So the next step now is to go back to the stippling like we did in the first steps, and using the liner brush like we did in those first steps. We're going to still be using the basic flesh tone that we did in the very beginning, and we're pretty much going to do the exact same things. So here we go. Flesh tone on my liner brush. And I'm going to come into the eyelid area. I'm going to dry brush all the same places I did before. Now, if I didn't do it very well the first time, or if I made some mistakes, maybe this time I'll try to make a little correction. Maybe if it was a little bit too brash, too bold, maybe now I would try to straighten it out or smooth it out a little bit and make it just a little bit more blended. And while I'm here, I might as well go ahead and put my paint back onto my puffy flesh wrinkles in this area by the eye. So while I'm here, I'll just enhance that a little bit. Now I want to get the other eyelid. You can be pretty strong with this color because we are going to do a lot of layers over the top of it, and it's not going to look blended just now, so you can put it down pretty strong. I am going to, on the flange, because this face is pretty small and the flange of the nose can get lost pretty easily, I'm going to go ahead with my liner brush and put that pattern, the edge of it back in there, and then just kind of dry brush it over so that I don't lose that. So you can see now where the flange is. Now last time we painted the lip, but from now on we're not going to put flesh back on that lip again. The lip is just going to start collecting washes of color. So no skin tone or flesh tone on the lip. I am going to go on to the forehead with my liner, and if I didn't like the wrinkles that I put in there the first time, I can fix them now. I can draw them out a little longer or add a few in between if I left spaces too big. So you can kind of play with those until they look a little bit more like human wrinkles. If you need to put the edge of the nose back in, you could, but I think it's better to kind of leave this alone for now and let it, maybe at a later date we can put some more definition in there, but for now I think it's best to leave it alone. Now I'm going to start stippling again. So I'm going to load my brush for a dry stipple, and at this point use a larger brush where you can and use a smaller brush where you need to. There's no one size brush that you have to use on the whole face. I'm using a 6 on some of these larger areas, and I might go down to a 4 when I get to the nose. But here's my cheek. I'm going to zoom in on that just a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. I want to keep the cheeks kind of high. Don't let the cheeks drop down too low because that'll make him look kind of sad. So keep those cheeks up high. Stipple. And then dry rub out into those shaded areas. I'm going to do his chin. And I want to make sure I have enough paint on my brush. Get that chin stippled in there, blot, and then do a little dry rub to blend it out. When you're working with the golden open, you have to be just a little more careful because it does stay workable a little bit longer than the Josonia. So you have to be a little more careful to let it dry thoroughly between layers. And I can see on this one cheek, let's see if you can see it, I've developed a little bit of a hole. Right here. So I'm just going to go back in there and pop a little bit of the flesh color right there and then leave it alone. I can blend it in better later. On the nose, I'm going to stipple again. And I'm being careful this time to make sure that I stay within my specific pattern. I don't want to just stipple randomly on the nose and let it grow too big. And up here I want to blend the nose into the forehead. Remember where we added a little bit of flesh over here on the side? I'm going to go back in there, put flesh in, and I want to put a little bit more in here as well, just to make sure that I have that temple area covered. I'll stipple and dry rub. Alright, now I'm just going to do a little bit of a dry rub to make sure I have blended my flesh tone out, all the way out to where I want it to be. Now we're going to let that dry. So if you want to work on another part of the Santa, you could do it now, or you could go to the hair dryer, dry him once again, and that's what I'm going to do. And then I'll do the next step. Okay, my surface is dry. I'm going to try a little different lighting for this step to see if I can get rid of some of that glare that I'm experiencing. The problem is there's so much light on the face, and the camera wants to pick up all that light and not give you a separation. But I think once we get a little more dark on the face, then you'll be able to see the definition a little bit better. But for now, I think we'll try this light and see if it works. I'm going to, like I said, my surface is nice and dry to the touch. And the next step, I'm going to be enhancing, increasing the dark on the face. So what I'm going to do is a dry rub. So I'm going to load my brush for a dry stipple. I'm putting my burnt sienna, if it's Josonia, it's brown earth. I'm putting that into my brush for a dry stipple, so I'm stippling it all into the brush and then I'm blotting it out. But I'm not going to stipple the dark on, I'm going to do a dry rub. So I'm going to lay the brush down, and I'm going to start in a safe place so I don't make a big blotch in the middle of the cheek. And I'm just going to start doing this rub. And I'm holding the brush way back on the handle so that I'm not applying a lot of pressure, and I'm just going to kind of rub first in the dark areas, and then I'm going to rub into the light areas as well. Basically the whole face will get a little coat of the dark value, but start in the safe places where you know you want it to be dark, or you can start down in the beard somewhere where it won't matter. You're going to use a light touch because We're not really stretching the paint yet. We're just kind of laying it down. Brown earth, or if it's golden, it's the burnt sienna. Now, I know that a lot of times people get a little bit nervous about making the face too dark, but it's difficult to get it too dark. You really have to pour that brown earth or the burnt sienna on. The main thing is you want everything that still looks kind of blue, you want it to turn kind of a grayish brown. So if you can still see a lot of what looks like blue to you, then you need to actually make sure that you rub your dark value all over the face. Now, tip it a little bit so you can see it a little better. And you can see that I have rubbed that brown all around on the face. I really, at this point, I haven't left anything that's just flesh. All of it has a little bit of brown earth or burnt sienna, and some places has more. But everything on that face has some dark on it. Now I want to make sure that that's dry again. So here comes the hairdryer again, or if you're using the Jasonia, you can work on a different part of the Santa for a little while until this surface dries to the touch. Once your surface is dry, you're ready for the next step, which is, guess what, more stippling. So what we're doing in these first steps is just building layers of flesh. We're progressing towards having some very light areas and graduating into some dark areas. So I'm going back to my flesh tone, still that same color you started with. I'm going to stipple, and I guess I could have started with my liner like I did before. It doesn't really matter if you start with your liner or if you start with your stippling. Either way, you're going to get the job done. Stippling on the lightest areas and then gently dry rubbing those areas to blend. We still have a few more layers to go, so don't be too concerned about getting this just perfect. Now on the chin, if you take a look at your photograph, you'll see that the chin is mostly dark. We might need to add a little bit of light, but for the most part, we want to leave it kind of dark. I'll move to a smaller blender brush. Still my round Bringle blender, but a little bit smaller now. For the nose, I'm going to get a little bit of the lightest area, just a little bit up from the bottom of the nose, and then pushing that paint or dry rubbing down towards the bottom. Now, if you don't keep the bottom of the nose a little bit darker than the highlight part of the nose, right now it doesn't matter, because you can put the dark back in, and believe me, you probably will, because there'll be a number of more steps to go. On the flange, I'll go ahead and stipple that this time, because I do have some pretty good definition there now, so I think I can leave that. On the forehead, I'll just use the tip of my blender. I don't want to continue to make my wrinkle lines too defined, because then you're going to look like you have big grooves in his forehead instead of just gentle wrinkles. So you can be kind of, I don't know, it's like you have to be kind of a little bit sloppy. Like you're on the wrinkle, but you're also alongside of the wrinkle. You're doing kind of all over, and so it just kind of softens everything. Don't keep trying to identify or define those wrinkles in a real strong way, because then he'll look like somebody ran over him with a truck or something. So, okay, so I've got my remember, and pay attention now, no more color on the lip. Leave that lip alone. Back to my liner brush, and still my flesh tone, and I want to go back into the lids now. So I'm going to pop this back up again. Maybe I won't be quite as aggressive this time. I'll lay it on a little bit at a time so that I can keep it softened and blended. Now, in doing this, it's hard for me to explain it, but it's like I said a minute ago, you're kind of just being sloppy. You're aiming for the spot where you want to put the most paint, but you're also kind of dry brushing all around there, and being a little bit sloppy about where it goes, so that nothing is super defined. You know, on a face, we don't really have hard lines. You know, maybe even along the edge of the lip, we don't have a hard line. So you want to make sure that things stay softened. So you kind of aim your brush for the right spot, but then you kind of let it work around in that area a little bit to soften everything that you do. I'm just going to increase the stippling a little bit one more time and try to get a little bit smaller area that's a little bit brighter now. The lights really do mess with my light areas, and they want to just glow like the moon on there. So I'll try to keep tipping it so you can see. Now the next step that we're going to do on this face is going to involve making sure that we have detail in the right places. For that, I'm going to use my clear acetate pattern. If you don't have one, you don't have to have it, but it's very helpful. And you can get these acetate patterns made at your local Office Max, Office Depot, places like that, but it's real helpful to have those. So next time we paint, I'll have my acetate pattern, and you'll have yours, maybe, and we'll start on our next steps. But that's all we have time for today, so I'll see you next time, and spend the time working on maybe getting started on some of your holly leaves, maybe some of your toys, and then as I work on the face and you work on the face with me, if you're working on some of those other areas, you'll be able to have them all finished all at the same time. So paint a little love this week. See you then. Bye.